Hello, welcome to WD18, the Watford fan channel. Welcome to a very special video, our 5-point plan to fix Watford Football Club. The first time we've ever done this on the channel. And we're delighted to be joined, not only by Sam, not only by Charlie, but one of the best Watford accounts on Twitter, Mr. Watford Analytics, Jordan. Jordan, thank you very much for coming on, mate. We were just saying off air, there's not many better voices to speak on the club and what needs to happen in the future. You do some great stuff. And I think from all of us, we're really excited to have you on today. So just first off, mate, how are you feeling? How you feel about Watford at the moment? And I'm sure there'll be a lot to discuss in this one.
Yeah, I'm feeling good. It's good to be back here. As we just said before we start recording, it's been a couple of years, but it's good to be back. And in terms of feeling about the club, it's a complicated answer to give. But I think I feel pretty similar to most right now. You know, there's still a little bit of hope for optimism, but some frustration. And the reason we're here, there's a few issues to solve as well. So a lot to get into in that sense.
A lot to get into. Top man. First off as well, thanks to everyone who sent their suggestions in. We put a tweet out last week about what you would like to see change about Watford and what would you like to see us talk about in this video. We've tried to read as many as possible. I've seen people put their own kind of open letters to Gino. There was one article put up as well, which was really nice. So we've tried to make sure they're all aligned in our 5 points that myself, Sam, Charlie, and Jordan are going to cover today. Sam, actually, before we get into that, I just want to ask you, why do you feel that this needs to be talked about at this moment in time? You know, there's a lot of, I think, fairly critical opinions about what's been happening at Watford this season. It's been a tough season to go to games for fans like yourself. Why do you think this conversation needs to be had?
I think from as early as 2012, 2013, when the Pozzos took over, it was quite clear where we were going as a football club in terms of the strategy. We wanted Premier League football. We wanted to become the best of the rest in the Premier League outside of the top 6. But I just feel that since the FA Cup final in 2019, the direction of the football club has been a bit lost, to be honest with you. I think the identity, both on and off the pitch, is pretty much been non-existent. And I think that this summer we say it every summer, but it's a huge summer for Watford Football Club. In all likelihood, we're going to be in the Championship again. A lot of players are going to be leaving. A lot of loan players are going to be leaving. So we can also assume that players are going to be coming in. Chris Wilder also may not be in charge next season. He's only on a contract until the end of this season. So Watford are at a crossroads come the end of the season. And I think it's time to question where are Watford Football Club going, not only as a football club, but in terms of their identity. And I think this 5-point plan, I think hopefully will give everyone a sense of where we're feeling Watford can mainly improve to go back into the right direction.
Sure. Charlie, just on the 5-point plan, we've kind of mentioned that when deciding our 5 points, we basically try to make it as realistic as possible with the view that Gino Pozzo will still be the owner and taking into consideration everything we know about Gino. So, Charlie, I'm going to kick it off with that first point, and that is the delegation of authority. So why is that number 1 on the 5-point plan?
Yeah, for me, I think this is one of the most vital points, and I think this might be Gino's biggest weakness in terms of that delegation. I think when you look at, especially the most recently with the Rob Edwards decision, they've obviously sat around in the summer. Scott has pitched that decision to hire Rob. Gino said yes, but after 10 games, Gino's made the decision that he doesn't want him. That's just one small example, but I think we know Gino is located at the training ground, so he is in there day to day. And I just think now we're at a point where he needs to improve his delegation. He needs to get expertise in who are going to make the decisions that they're skilled, they've got experience for. And I think that's where we need to kind of empower these people. And I think one of the most positive steps that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years was earlier this season and the appointment of Ben Manga as technical director. I think Jordan knows quite a lot about this. I'm interested to hear his thoughts, but I think we've got someone there who has literally helped Frankfurt against the odds win the Europa League last season. It was a real coup getting him in. Everyone's talked about the talent that he's discovered and how highly thought of. Everyone was like, why is he going to Watford? So we've brought in this expertise now, and we really need to let him run with it. I think, Jacob, I don't know if you've got it there, but we put together a bit of an org chart in terms of kind of really basic org chart in terms of people's roles and what it looks like. So at the top, you've got Gino Pozzo, the owner. And then I know there's different areas, but I've tried to strip it back to make it as simple as possible. We have got Cristiano Gioretta, who we believe is his contract runs out in the summer, so he'll be leaving the club. So I've really stripped it back, and there's just Ben Manga below Gino as technical director. And I see him looking after all things football operations. And then also under Gino is Scott Duxbury, who I think, just my personal opinion, it might be wrong. It'd be interesting what you guys think in the comments, but Scott should be looking after the business side of the football club. We've got roles there as finance director, head of comms, and stuff like that. So, Jordan, what do you make of? It's really basic, and there's loads of roles that is not filled in there. But what do you think in terms of how the club is run in the hierarchy at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you touched on there is important. You know, he's an owner that's at the training ground, and it's not the common practice necessarily. But I think when you have an owner like that, there's an element of you want them to understand when to be involved, and also when to, as you say, delegate and be somewhat hands off. And it doesn't always have to be bad intentioned. If you have an interest in the club and you want to succeed, and you feel like you can have an input, you own it ultimately. So I completely get the kind of the want or the desire to be involved, but you might not have the expertise, or you might have others around you that might have a better sense of the idea. Of course, too, it's difficult for those to argue with the person that owns the club as well. So oftentimes you might have these sorts of issues arise. Even when you're putting together the charts there and stuff, it's difficult to pinpoint. We have to make guesses in some places too, because it's not a real clear structure. We don't know exactly all the details, but we have a few key figures that we can talk about. And you mentioned there, I think Manga coming in is a positive, not just because he has a good track record and there's some promise around him, what he's done at Frankfurt, but also I think it adds another voice in that room. I think it's now Scott, Gino, and Manga too that have to make these decisions. They all have to be active in it, which I don't think is a bad thing. And also maybe, as you say as well, pushes Scott perhaps towards the business side of the football club. And again, we don't know entirely because we haven't been told fully, but from what we do know, I'd say that Scott was maybe a little bit too heavily involved in footballing matters for his role. So adding more kind of complexity and kind of more dimensions to that team is a positive, or at least you hope it would be. And then, as you say, the next step is to give these guys autonomy to do their job the best way they can, and see if we can actually kind of get that cohesion amongst that group, rather than having that kind of segregated level of authority, which is ultimately, I think, failed us a little bit.
That authority, Sam, with Manga coming in, so there's been, the excitement is there in terms of, as Charlie mentioned, what he has done at Eintracht Frankfurt, and Jordan's just mentioned that as well. But there's been a little bit of skepticism, I'd say, about how much influence he will actually have at Watford, based on the way Gino Pozzo operates as an owner. And as we mentioned, he's very hands-on. As a Watford fan, how confident are you that we will see that? Do you feel like this is actually a change? Obviously Manga signed a 5-year deal from what we've been reading in the German press. He seems like he's here for a long-term project. Is it remain to be seen, or do you genuinely have a confidence that there will be a change of direction?
I think it remains to be seen. We know that Gino Pozzo's got a way of working, and I think that's still come through this season, even with Ben Manga at the football club. Obviously, Slaven Bilic didn't see out his contract and got sacked. It looks like Chris Wilder won't be here next season as well. So that managerial rotation, so accustomed to a Gino Pozzo football club, has still been there. So I'm not sure how much influence Ben Manga will have at this stage, but I like to think from the summer he's going to play a vital role in recruitment in particular. I like to think that in the early part of Gino Pozzo's reign, when we first got into the Premier League, Watford were 2-3 steps ahead of everyone else in the Championship and in the Premier League as well at times. And we've sort of lost sight of that and become two or three steps behind everyone else now. I look at clubs like Brighton and Brentford, who I'll talk about a bit later a bit more, who are so far ahead of everyone else in terms of the way their football clubs are run. Yeah, I think someone like Ben Manga, the way he managed Frankfurt on such a limited budget and brought them European success, I think can hopefully restore our status as being 2 steps ahead of everyone else.
Charlie, I just wanted to bring you in there, mate, in terms of a couple of roles that you've highlighted in that kind of structure. And there was 2 that were highlighted red, and that was player care and head of medicine and performance. Now, from what we know, those roles aren't filled at the moment. And I've seen, particularly player care is becoming increasingly important in this day and age as well. So is that one of those things that you would look to rectify pretty quickly over the summer? Is that one of those places where we can start to kind of make those steps back, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think player care is you're going to see it pop up in football a lot more. There's own consultancies and companies now working with football clubs, but it's such a vital part. And I fear with Watford, the way we've been run in the last 5 years, we've done quite a lot of kind of reputable damage in terms of players coming, how they've been treated. We've seen recently with the kind of the food expenses that they weren't told about. And I just think we need to get to a point where someone is kind of, look, we're getting these players in from all around the world. And we need someone to have that accountability to make sure they're most looked after and that the group are happy. I'm just worried that we've had so much chopping and changing and players coming in and out of the playing staff. And I think now we're going to get to a point where people are going to go, oh, Watford want me. They're going to ask other people in football. And this goes for head coaches as well. So I just think that role would be really important for me. And I just think it's something that we looked at. I don't think it's a priority. I think one area which I want to ask Jordan about again is the head of medicine and performance. That's just, I think, what Brighton call theirs. But I think this season, how many points do you reckon we've dropped because of injuries? I think, like recurring injuries, like it's been, we've never seen the light before. So I think that area, I don't know how you feel about it, Jordan. I don't know how much you know about it, but I don't want it to be a case of, just get rid of whoever's in there. But I feel that needs to be reviewed and improved going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a complex issue when it comes to sport performance and injuries in particular in regards to Watford, which has obviously been it's plagued us this season. We've missed a lot, probably lost a few points from not having players available, and often reoccurring injuries, a lot of soft tissue injuries we're seeing in the same players. Someone like João Ferreira, he gets here in a couple of weeks after arriving, he's out injured. It's unfortunate. Obviously, there's an element of randomness. It's never going to be an even playing field. There's always going to be that element of luck involved. But clearly, it's been slightly mismanaged, and it's always a back and forth. There's different departments that are involved in kind of getting these players match day. They're ready. Every single player is be carrying injuries at this point in the season, so you have to manage that. There's going to be different recommendations coming from different departments. And ultimately, you have to have someone that is able to oversee this and kind of give their input and make these decisions as best they can. It's not going to work every time, but there has to be some kind of base level understanding of where these guys are at. And I think there's definitely room to have more consistency in that regard. And just from things that I've heard around the club, it sounds like there's no real consensus of idea as to why we've received the injury record we've had this year. So that's not a good thing. We have to be able to kind of investigate the situation and kind of come to some conclusion, try and take some positive action, because, a club in the situation we're in, we've had quite a lot of players available to us this year, but we could be next year, we might not have as much depth in some areas, even though you could debate we don't in others too. We have to get this right. And it's somewhat of a foundational, basic level of running a football club. And it's probably the worst it's been in a number of years for us, and that really can't continue if we'd have any success.
One of the positions that we really wanted to talk about in terms of the structure at Watford, we mentioned in terms of specific roles, but we mentioned Gino, Scott Duxbury, Gioretta, whose contract looks to be ending at the end of this season, and one man who's, I don't know if he's officially on the Watford payroll, I don't know if you guys know this, but Mogi Bayat is a man that keeps popping up here and there. He's brokered deals with Watford players coming to the club. He's brokered deals with Nantes, but they've significantly reduced their relationship with him. This is a man who isn't viewed particularly well by Watford fans. It's important to note that he has brokered, for example, the Sarr deal from Sarr to Obiolari. So there's been quite a lot of deals across the board. Why do you feel that, and I know you're quite strong on this, why do you feel that the association with him needs to end in order for us to progress as a football club?
I don't want to stick any claims out there. I think if anyone wants to find out about Mogi Bayat, just simply Google him. But I think it's fair to say that for every, I don't know, Ismaila Sarr that we have got, I think, too many, we've got too many, the likes of Obiolares under Mogi Bayat. And secondly, I don't want someone with those accusations levelled against him associated with our football club. I won't go into too much more detail about that. Like I say, just Google his name. But I just think in terms of resetting the culture, resetting the recruitment, things that we will come on to talk about, I think it's going to be vital that Watford, I don't know if part ways is the right term, but move on to working with a wider range of agents rather than going into Mogi Bayat's pool of talent.
Sure. And in terms of the recruitment, Charlie, just to follow up on that, we've mentioned, I mean, this season has been a prime example of actually looking to youth, whether that our hand's been forced in some respects with the injuries that we've just mentioned there. There's been more first-team opportunities, contracts for players as well coming through. Just to name a few, Harry Amass, Ryan Andrews, Adrian Blake, Jack Greaves, Toby Adeyemo, Shaq Ford have all kind of been in the first-team picture. Funnily enough, Adrian Blake, I think, might be moving to Tottenham, according to rumours. But that academy focus, I mean, since the Pozzos have come in, or Gino and Scott, etc., it is fair to say that we have really lacked in that department. I mean, I think you can tell by the outpouring of joy when Toby Adeyemo scored this season that we were just happy to see someone who'd come through the academy and actually made their name. But it's a part of the club which a lot of the history has been built on. I think particularly under Graham Taylor. I know it's a completely different time, but we mentioned those values, which will come on into a moment. And the academy has been a big part of that at Watford. How realistic is it for us to actually put more focus onto the academy and actually see results? Because it does feel like even if we did let's just say there was a completely refocus of strategy, we wouldn't see the impact or the effects of it until 5 years down the line.
Yeah, this was the one point where we loads of comments about the academy, people wanted to see youth, and we were like, do we make this one of our main points? But I think what you mentioned at the start in terms of knowing Gino, knowing how much emphasis, is it realistic that he's suddenly going to invest heavily in the academy and look to bring those players in? I think it's doubtful. The players you named there, we've got some exciting players. Harry Amass, who plays for England. I think Chelsea and Manchester United are after him. You mentioned about Adrian Blake. I think one thing that we can do and what we should be doing, and it's something that Scott Duxbury mentioned to Andrew French, I think at the start of the season, where he said he wants to see more names in the first team squad. But those players who we think have got potential, we need to try and give them contracts early, and we need to give them opportunities in the cup games, on the bench. I mean, James Morris, pound for pound, he's probably been one of our better performers. Do you know what I mean? Just because he's been given a chance. So it's something where, do I think Gino's we're going to refocus to the youth? Doubtful, but I'd love to see a bit more investment. I'd love to see more coaching and more kind of help in terms of Richard Johnson and Jimmy Gilligan, and just try and get those players more opportunities penned down. Because if we see Adrian Blake go to Tottenham, Harry Amass, those Toby Adeyemo, it's going to be disappointing.
Jordan, just before we move on to the next point of this plan, and just on the academy and your thoughts on it, is it realistic for us to expect there to be change? Do you think there'd be change in that department?
I don't think Gino really trusts the process of the youth academy system. I think, we see, as we're talking about players now, if you do have talent, just the way the structure is in terms of when they can sign contracts with the club and pro deals. Oftentimes, even in our location as well, they're getting picked up by teams around us, and even Man City have picked up our players in the past as well. If they've got real talent, they go. So it's tough. If you want to stay, you have to really kind of make sure they've got that opportunity to be playing in the first team eventually, or have some path of progression. It's unlikely they're going to opt to stay at Watford if they have a bigger club calling. And yeah, I mean, you look at the system we've got now; it's not great. Very little real talent you expect to get into that first team. Even someone like Morris is not someone we'd expect to be around there, at the start of the season. I think if we're really serious about any of these players we currently have, they're out on loan. If they're not on loan, if they're around the under 21s and under 23s and so on, they're not really players we're looking at kind of having any sort of progression to the first team. And most of the time it's used as an option to, you have to kind of fill that spot, and it's a way to kind of get those first teamers coming back from injury. They can get involved a little bit, and maybe you get someone out on loan, gets a little bit of value there, and you can sell on someone perhaps like Joseph Hungbo is a good example of that. But it's definitely something that would need a lot of work. And if you're talking about pushing the club forward, I think that's probably one of the more long-term solutions to kind of solving issues at the club would be the youth system. I think that's something that would take a good few seasons, good few years to kind of correct and get back on track if you are serious about making it an actual pathway to the first team at least.
You've just reminded me, Jordan, actually, just last point on this whole point, because I know we spoke about it for a while, but Brentford's model of turning the academy into a B team. I know this has been suggested by fans about whether Watford should go down that route based on, I guess, the relative success of that approach. What are the pros and cons of that? I don't know how much you know about it, but do you think would actually benefit from moving to that system?
I think if we're doing what we're doing, then yes. If we continue kind of down this route, we're not really looking at it as being necessarily a route to the first team for the under-21s and so on. I think it's a good option. You know, I've spent a lot of time watching under-23 football, under-21 football, and what I will say from if you look at the Premier League teams, even Championship teams and so on, it's a much different environment. It's a very sterile game. You know, it's about possession, it's about pattern of movement, but it's not ultra competitive. It's not a good place to be. If you're a player that's in those situations, you're playing for the 21s, playing for the 23s, you're not in a great position to proceed, really, for most clubs. And it's not the ideal place to be. So if you are going to be sticking kind of down this route and keeping things similar to where they are, you might as well go for a B team setup. In my opinion, there's probably more value to it. Because right now, I think we're kind of like in a half-measured situation where we're going along. We've got an under-21 team. We've got this kind of tiered system, but we're not really investing much there. We're not investing really from a coaching perspective. We're not out there scouring to try and bring in this young talent to eventually get to the first team. So I don't think it's a bad idea to be exploring that as an option.
Moving on to the next point would be on resetting the culture, and that's one of the ways in which to do that. And we mentioned the values that the club off the pitch, particularly in the community, have really tried to continue: the equality, integrity, connection, unity, sustainability of the football club. We've mentioned before, Sam, about the kind of the long and proud tradition that Watford have had in the community. I know you've seen that firsthand as well with some of the projects the club do. And that status as the original family club, which is obviously one that we're really proud of and one that continues to help people who live in and around Watford as a town. But in terms of resetting the culture on the pitch, what is it about the culture at the moment that as a fan you're not really connecting with? Because that's the one word that I've probably would label it for me would be the connection I'm having at the moment. And you've gone to games home and away this season. What is it about the culture at the minute that needs to change?
Yeah, something that from the Rookery end, our friends, another Watford podcast, have stated quite a few times, is I think it sort of has to be, the term Watford Football Club has to be split into three. You have Watford, which is the incredible work that the club do off the pitch. I don't think anyone can doubt that. The identity and the culture off the pitch, the We campaign, the day that we're recording this is Anti-Discrimination Day. And the club done brilliant work for that. The work of the trust is absolutely fantastic. They're brilliant people at the football club. But then you look at the football side of things, where the culture isn't there, and the club, as well as we've spoken about, needs a whole restructuring, I think. So in terms of what I've seen that's missing at games is I just think looking at, going to Swansea away, Blackburn away, Millwall away, you look at full time, you just look over at the pitch and think, do any of these players really care? Because they go home to their nice houses, they're ultimately getting paid, and there's no jeopardy for them because it'll be the manager who takes the blame. And I think that needs to change. There needs to be accountability for players and consequences if they're not performing as well. And I think through changing that, I think that's where the culture really will be reset, because I think players will realise that there's just so much more to just simply picking up a wage. There's so much more to being part of Watford Football Club and wearing the shirt as well.
So, Charlie, you've had this debate with Sam about the players caring, and it's a term that does get thrown about a lot, particularly when the club isn't doing well. And you've spoke to players this season, you've said that actually they do care, and you know that from speaking to them. Firstly, I wanted to ask you about that, and then the second thing would be in terms of what you see as actually resetting the culture. How would you define that? How does that actually look in your eyes?
Yeah, it's kind of linked to the first one in terms of that authority. And I think we need to give our head coach more kind of, I look at like Manchester United, we talked about, and you mentioned, Jacob, Ralph Rangnick last season said, they need open heart surgery. But the reality is that's not happened. but they've come in, they've given Erik ten Hag the autonomy and the power and the control and the discipline. And I think it's going to come on to another point, but what Sam said about the players, no, it's not that it's the head coach that's going to get it. So the players do need these consequences. And when I say these players, they care, I think they care, but I think there's a difference between being invested, loving the club, than caring. So I'm not letting them off the hook, because I think we have seen some poor performances where we could have had levels above. But I just think it's like a overall culture that kind of seeps in of negativity. Whenever we see on the pitch we have any adversity, James McLean scores against us, it's like, oh God, we can't get back into this, or we concede first. How many times have we come back to win this season? I don't think we have. So
I think it's just once. Cardiff away, I think, is the only one.
Yeah, so I just think that I don't blame the players, I don't blame the head coach, but I think a way to go about that would be having this head coach that we trust. We're going to talk about a point later on about giving him at least a year. And I also think one thing we've missed massively is having a captain on the pitch. We got Tom Cleverley, who is a club captain, but he's just not been available at all. And we haven't got those two leaders, those people who are in control and control everything. And I think that's been a massive issue for us in terms of culture around the dressing room, training ground, etc.
Yeah, for sure. I think the leader point is a really interesting one, and actually the fact that we've given it to João at this point of the season, because ultimately he's our best player by a considerable distance, probably says it all really at 21. Jordan, on just similar question to Charlie, actually, just in terms of resetting the culture, you hear it bandied about a lot that, and fans want to see a different direction and a reset of culture. To you, how does that look?
Well, I think the point about a leader on the pitch is a valid one. I think even just the opposite end of the scale, I think having a leader at the top end too. I think there's an element of toxicity that kind of seeps into the environment, which it goes into every aspect, whether it be individual department or the playing staff, and it comes through. And I think when you talk about players caring, they're not going to have the same connection to the club we are. They might build some levels of connections and so on, but a lot of it comes down to pride. And I think, if we've all been in a work environment before where, if things aren't going well in a certain area, it can affect everything. And obviously for us, the biggest interaction, the kind of face-to-face interaction we have with the team is what they do on the pitch. So it's frustrating, and it's a difficult position in some ways for the players to be put in. There are obviously times where the players have to be accountable too. But I think for me, it does start at the top. And I think having that cohesion, having that sense of direction and everyone pulling together to achieve something. You look at teams that have been successful over longer periods of time or even shorter periods of time. There has to be a common goal, and there has to be a level of unity. And I think there's been so much, segregation and differences, been just somewhat of a mess between different departments. It's really come through on the pitch. And yeah, it's an area we have to address. And, we hope that as we talked about earlier on, if Manga has the autonomy to make decisions and make changes, then there's potential there that we could see an improvement. And I think we have to find a way to have that trickle down.
We mentioned the accountability there, the head coach autonomy, control, and with a captain. Whether we see the head coach autonomy, it will yet to be seen. I actually think the closest we're going to get to that is if Ben Manga gets that for me. I don't know if you guys disagree with that, but I'd be very surprised for Gino to completely scrap it and go, you know what, I'm going to give it to a head coach. I think Rob was probably the man if we were going to do that. And I think we were kind of not sold that. I think that's probably a bit too far, but it was the impression that he was going to be given the license to do a bit more than what previous head coaches had done. So actually, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, in terms of autonomy, I don't think the head coach of Watford's ever going to be like Sir Alex Ferguson, but I think Ben Manga's looking after the football operations, transfers. Ben Manga's deciding who his man is as a head coach, but that head coach looks after all his coaching staff, all the players. Do you know what I mean? He dictates training. He works with Ben Manga on it. Having that control, especially with players, because we've heard from Rob and different managers, the players coming in, there's no alignment, isn't there? But I definitely think we need to improve giving control to our head coaches, because at the moment it just feels like they get given the players and they just get asked, take the training sessions, take the team talks and hope we win. But that's where we're not getting any unity that we talked about. And I didn't want to mention too much about Graham Taylor, because I do think football moves on. But for me, one thing if you say, what do you think about Watford Football Club, or what's the one thing? The one thing I can hang my hat on is Graham Taylor and the values he brought and what he did for the club. And I do think there's elements that we need to look at what he did, how he ran things, what his principles were, and we need to have that in our setup.
Yeah, agreed. Sam, just to add to that, would you be keen to see that before we just list a couple of others in this point?
Yeah, 100%. And the thing that I'm looking at, I'm not sure how realistic it's going to be, but Elton John's tour obviously is up at the end of this year, I think. I'm not too sure. And he said when he did his concert at Vicarage Road that he is keen to, be at a few more games or have some form of involvement at the football club. And I highly doubt that's going to be in any form of investment, but just having that figure there, maintaining the values of Graham Taylor and trying to implement them on the football club, I think will go a long, long way.
Yeah,
I'd worry for his health if he starts coming to Vicarage Road often.
To be fair, if he gave me that speech, at the concert, it was on the first night, wasn't it? Show some effing passion. Love it. Going to move on to the next point. And Jordan, I'll just bring you in here, mate. So the third point, so we've had the first one, delegation of authority. Number 2, resetting the culture. And this is number 3, deciding on an identity, playing style. So the floor is yours, Jordan.
I think the most important thing is you have to, before you can do anything, before you can plan anything, ultimately what you're trying to do is improve performance on the pitch. We talk about consistency. We might not see that with a head coach in terms of you're going to have coaches, you're going to have players that are going to move. That's the reality of the situation we're in. Maybe you could think differently if you're a top end club and you're the end goal for a coach or a player, but we're not. That's just how it is. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but what you have to do is you have to create stability away from those figures. So the first thing you need to do in that sense is establish what do you want to see on the pitch, what's the goal, decide what you want, and then from there you can build off it. If you decide you want to play a certain style of football, that's where you look for your playing stuff, and that's where you look for your head coaches. You don't bring in the head coach and then say, okay, we've got this head coach. This is how he likes to play. Let's adapt to it. You have to work in the market differently and so on. It's much harder for everyone. If you've got a recruitment team there, ideally they're looking 3-4 windows ahead. Every player there's a contingency for. It becomes very difficult when you're changing kind of your pathway and the ideas you want to kind of get on the field. I think that's one thing we started off quite well with. You think about when the owners first came in and when Gino first came in, the coaches we brought in, there were similarities. The squad, could build in a similar fashion. There was even similarities to Udinese too. So when we had that influx of players from Udinese, they're brought into originally a team that played in a similar fashion. So you're able to bring in the Vidras and the Amin Abdis, or the centre backs that come from the back three and so on. The wing backs. It was all more in line. I think once we started to get closer to that goal that we had set ourselves, of promotion, once you get in those higher ends, you have to maybe become a little bit more streamlined and adapt. And obviously we all know the route we went down from there. But I do think we started to stray away from that, and we've become too reactive and too short term in a multitude of ways. So yeah, this is a question you probably give to Manga, and it would be up to him to say, this is what we're looking for. This is what we have at the club that meets that. You maybe include some of your stronger assets you have that you expect to be around next year to kind of influence that potentially, and you address it from there. And it's really the ground point, the starting point for kind of this transition period that we're going through, for lack of a better phrase. And it's the ultimate beginning point for me.
Do you think it could be likely that Manga, who I totally agree should make this decision, I think he needs to make this decision before he chooses a head coach. Do you think it's likely that he'll look at his success at Frankfurt when he's been there, done it, and might look to do something similar?
Potentially. I mean, it depends how situational those decisions were at the time. If he came in there and he also had less control at Frankfurt too. A lot of the time, the players were coming in, he maybe didn't have much input in terms of the style of play. We kind of know how they operate at Frankfurt, so maybe he'll feel some level of comfort. Generally you're going to kind of go back to what you are most confident in, and if that's recruiting a certain type of player for a certain sort of system, then potentially, yeah. But I would like to think, that he's able to be able to do it. I think every one of these points we're going through, we have to keep reiterating if power is relinquished enough for these things to happen. So even if he has to state his case for a certain thing, then yeah, I'd like to think that he's able to take into account what we've got currently and see what suits too. And it's one thing that I think is important is you have to look at those around you. It's kind of football is a copycat game. You want to see what's working, and you want to try and copy that as much as you can. It's not a bad thing. You can look for your own ways to to adapt it or to suit your needs and specific requirements. But if you see a club that's doing something successfully and doing it well, there's nothing wrong in trying to emulate that in your own way. And I think that we've seen that. I think there was a soft attempt at doing that with someone like Rob Edwards. Even the sense of bringing a coach that's playing with a back three. We've seen that work well for teams that have gone up the ladder, got promoted. It's also a nice flexible system you can use in the higher division to be more defensive and so on. It's adaptable for recruitment purposes and so on and so on. But if you don't really go fully in on it, then you end up in the situation we are. And Rob started the season with a left wing back at right wing back, and it was never really prepared. So establishing that early on is super important, and I hope that he is given the chance to do so. And I think I would guess that he would be taking into account what we currently have at our disposal and incorporate that into the plan.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. In terms of the principle, Sam, just to bring and kind of build on what Jordan said there, we've mentioned what he did at Eintracht Frankfurt, and kind of the principles there was it was a 3 at the back formation, 3-4-2-1, direct. I think it's fair to say high pressing, quick interplay, counter attacking, counter pressing. Are those the sort of principles that you think any of those? Do you think any of those we're missing at the minute, or do you think it's just a complete start again in terms of the players we have as well? Like, what principles do you think we should be really looking to use?
Yeah, I think it's a case of starting again, because I think the Wigan game is a prime example of it. I think we saw glimpses of it, particularly in the first half, of that direct, the quick interplay, a bit of counter pressing as well. I think we saw glimpses of that in the first half, but then in the second half, it was pretty much non-existent. So I think it's pretty much going to be starting again. But I think back to, at least in my lifetime, the Watford sides that I've enjoyed watching, under particularly Gianfranco Zola, under Javi Gracia, elements I think under Nigel Pearson as well, was all of those being direct, high pressing, the quick interplay, counter-attacking football. I love that at Vicarage Road, when players are getting to the byline, pulling it back, with committing men into the box and trying to finish off chances. And we just haven't seen enough of that over the last few years. So I think definitely reintroducing that, and what Ben Manga had, and also to an extent of what Graham Taylor seemed to have at Watford, would go a long way.
With kind of how things are at Vicarage Road, and I know there's an element of this for every team. It's always often the case. The stadium's hard to get the atmosphere going, but I think one thing that Watford has always been susceptible to is a team that plays with an element of tempo, and I think we struggle to associate with the kind of slower, more lethargic defensive styles. And it's not always the most practical, but you mentioned the teams there. Of course, they're teams that have been successful, but I think there's an element of energy that they bring into the stadium which is somewhat contagious. And I think it's hard. I think Vicarage Road could be a particularly hard place to create an atmosphere, and I think that's one thing where it is a little bit more infectious. There are some teams that the home crowd will get behind the team no matter what, even if the play is a little bit different. But I think for Watford, it's important that they have that. And we talk about Manga there and what he's done. Kind of in German football, it is common to see that sort of play style. And I think it's also a very it's an adaptable play style, but you can recruit for it relatively, not, I wouldn't say easily, but you kind of have quite a few options. It's a little bit broader. So I think that is something that I would probably expect. And even in the short term, I think that would probably have played a part in the appointment of Wilder too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's very similar systems. And Charlie, on that, just wanted to bring you in terms of what Jordan said there on the player profiles. What is it particularly about? What attributes should we really be looking for when we're recruiting? Obviously, it's very position specific, but is there an overarching attributes that we should be looking to aim for?
Yeah, I've got a couple down: pace, and then the two which I think we lack at the moment, physicality. I look back to Etienne Capoue and Decore, how physical they were, dynamic. We had two, and they it was like having three in midfield, wasn't it? They're both.
They get me emotional, Charlie.
I just think we lack that physicality and dynamism in the midfield, especially. But I just don't see our players as big, athletic. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I think Jao could turn into that, but he's still 21. Pace, I think, is a given. But another thing which I think we seriously lack at the moment is football intelligence. And even we're going to keep referencing the Wigan game, but even in Ranuza, who I think is a fantastic player, but at times he gives away cheap free kicks, and Hassan Kamara, stuff like that. We've just got players. It's my biggest pet peeve, giving cheap free kicks away. I felt like last season in the Premier League, we conceded to just free kicks around the box. Someone would chip in, but we just need players with a bit more intelligence. So they're the three I'd go for: pace, physicality, and intelligence. I think they're kind of attributes which I think we need more in this team.
Yeah, for sure. That now really does. I think particularly this season, you've looked at the squad and you've gone, and I don't want to always compare it to the last time we got promoted, but there is just a complete difference in terms of the way we manage games, etc. And one of the things that I think will need to happen from my perspective is that plan B and C. I think too many times this season, plan A hasn't worked, and we've really failed to find another way to break teams down. I think that also comes down to recruitment. It's a multi-layered issue, I think, in terms of it probably dates back to the players that we actually have. But I don't think it's any coincidence that the best performances we've seen this season have been against better footballing teams. For example, Middlesbrough at the start of the season, Burnley at the start of the season, Sheffield United,
Norwich away.
Yeah, there's quite a few where you look at it and you go, there's a reason why we've played a lot better against those teams. And then again, Wigan, those sort of teams in and around the bottom, it hasn't been great to watch, because I feel like unless we do get that, and also I think it also, just to mention that, Sam, that you made a great point about actually how many times we come back against teams. And I think that actually goes down to not having a plan B when teams go a goal ahead, and actually just sit back and go, look, you can kind of break us down now. And whether we have the ability to do that, I think is definitely, I'm yet to see that, if I'm completely honest. So that kind of wraps up the identity playing style, the Manga Frankfurt blueprint, if we see that next season. Moving on to point number 4, and Sam, this is going to throw over to you for this one, mate. And that is the commitment to a one-season plan. So can you maybe just expand on what that means to people who maybe didn't mention this in their points, and why you think this is particularly important to the 5-point plan?
Yeah, I think the thinking behind this one is the idea that you're going to stick with a head coach through thick and thin, come hell or high water, unless there's...
That was very good.
Unless, of course, there is a serious threat of relegation or something catastrophic happening. And I've picked out a few managers here that I'd like to give examples of. I think that when Rob Edwards came in the summer, I think we thought that, yes, we'll give him the season. All right, if we don't go up, then we'll reevaluate his position come the end of the season. But we'd be sticking with him and hoping that we have someone there who fans can really get behind, regardless of results. And I look at, as I say, the examples I've picked up on. I look at Graham Potter, who towards the start of his time at Brighton, I think there were a couple of times fans were sort of teetering against him, thinking the football wasn't unbelievable, but they stuck with him even when results weren't unbelievable. And now they've got De Zerbi, who they brought in, again, a swift transition, and they're flying. FA Cup semi-final, pushing for Europe. I also pick up on Thomas Frank at Brentford. They lost a playoff final one to him. Did they sack him? No, they backed him even more. And now they're in the Premier League under him, absolutely flying, pushing for Europe. Vincent Kompany at Burnley, yes, of course, they're having an unbelievable season, but they recruited for a manager. They were able to get behind him and gave him the tools to succeed. And the last one that I think is probably more realistic in terms of where Watford are is Russell Martin. Because, yes, for me, looking on from the outside, it's probable that I think Martin moves on from Swansea in the summer. But what they have is, because they've given him 2 years, even though results haven't been unbelievable, a clear style of play is what they have. They battered Watford earlier in the season. They did the double over us. And I think we all saw their style of play. It's very possession orientated. What I want is stick to a manager for one season, give him the tools to succeed, and let them work their magic pretty much without pulling the trigger too early. Sorry.
I think you've summed that up really well, mate. And just one caveat to it, Charlie, is, we mentioned in this commitment to a one-season plan, in the horrible case that we are under serious threat of relegation, which, look, can happen. I mean, we've seen plenty of teams who've been in the Premier League for a comfortable period of time kind of slip down the divisions, and you can never write it off. In that event, do you still stick with the head coach? Do you still go, you know what, this is a case where you've got to stick with him based on that sort of, and it goes, I guess that it does link back to resetting the culture if you really want to change it?
Yeah, a couple of things in that. And again, what we spoke about at the beginning in terms of let's make this realistic. Like, because I've seen a couple of comments saying, we want a 3 or a 5 year plan. Is that going to happen under Gino next season? Doubtful. And in terms of, I think we have to have some realism and some kind of, I call it crisis management of, if we're in the Championship and there is a serious threat of relegation, then we have to be realistic that if we need to change the head coach, we should. But what we should be doing and what Ben Manga should be doing at the start of this season is going, this person is my number one, who I want to be my head coach, and then have a short list of 4 or 5 that all play to his playing style that he wants. So if we do have to change the head coach because it's going that badly, we've got someone come in who is going to play that playing style and have that consistency. Sam gave some great examples there, and the Potter De Zerbi evolution has just been unbelievable because it's been a similar kind of style. So, yeah, I think that's really important. And I think one thing that I think is important for a one-season plan is our objective and knowing who we are and how good we are. I don't know about you guys. I'll pass it over to Jordan, but I think our plan should be next season, we need to get into the top 6. That's our goal. And that can be what the head coach after a year can be judged by. Does he make us into the top 6? But I think having a clear objective, I do think, and I think me and Sam, even when we bumped into Scott Duxbury, he was very confident with Rob that we're going to win the league, when realistically, after the season we had last season, it was never going to happen. So I don't know what you guys think, but I think having a realistic goal of being in the top 6 would help the one-year plan work. What do you reckon, Jordan?
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, you have to set expectations accordingly, and I think there's a 1 year. I mean, 1 year plan, or you could even say first year plan, even if you want to. It's something that you have to look at. You have to look in isolation. You might have a plan over 5 years, but obviously the next season is the most important one. That's the one you can influence the most and deal with. And I think, setting targets and appropriately doing so is important. And all these things, they rely on to stick with that head coach, to give the time, and to make sure you're able to kind of give him that backing. You have to be stable in the other areas off the pitch, and that's kind of what we discussed earlier. All these kind of points roll into one, really, to be successful in any of them. You have to have that. So if we can do that, if we can get things kind of sorted in the summer, it's a lot of work to do. I don't know if there's ever been as much pressure on a technical director or someone similar to that role as there's been put on Ben Manga. And look, it's not just him. There are others there that have a lot to play, but he's kind of the most kind of focal point, I guess, that we can look to. So, yeah, it's a big job, but I think we can kind of take the information we get as it comes through, and hopefully see some positive signs of these actions we're talking about taking place. And it starts with the other things we've mentioned, with the head coach appointment, and the changes we get access to behind the scenes. We can maybe start to kind of get an idea of the blueprint we're working towards, and then hopefully have a better understanding of what that one season or first season plan is going to be.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, just in terms of the way that it resets the culture, another case study that I want to give is Mikel Arteta at Arsenal. And I know Arsenal are 10 times the size of Watford, but I think there are so many similarities between the two football clubs. And I look back to when Arteta first came in 3 years ago or so, and Arsenal had no direction, they had no identity, the club was toxic, the fan base was toxic. And despite, a couple of years where they weren't in the Champions League, Arteta was able to get rid of the bad apples in the dressing room, build his own team according to his own style of play, and now look where they are. They're flying. Now, I know Watford, realistically, will we get to near the top of the Premier League? Probably not, unless the City miracle happens. But I think we can look at that blueprint and go, let's get a manager Let's get rid of the player he doesn't want, bring in a player he does want. That also gives consequences to the players like we spoke about earlier. And I think eventually we'll see Watford start to fly again, to be honest. I think as well, and Jacob, I'll throw this question over to you. Charlie mentioned there, let's say Watford have an unbelievable back in the season, sneak into the playoffs. Let's say we get promoted. I'm not sure. Do you think, obviously as football fans, we want to win things. We want to be playing at the highest level possible. Do you think in terms of having a blank slate, it will benefit Watford in the long term to stay in the Championship?
What do you mean by long term? Is that
so? Do you think that if Watford go up next season, that will throw a spanner in any works of building a long-term culture, because it's just going to be about survival in the Premier League?
I think I don't know whether step back's the right word. It depends as I think Jordan hit the nail on the head, and what your aim is for the next couple of seasons. Because ultimately, if we did go up in the unusual event, I think I even said I'd go in the pond if we went up. It would be something that probably, although was planned this season, I don't think anyone really would have expected come the run-in. So obviously it would change the way in which we recruit. It would change the head coach we probably go after. So I guess in the sense that it would certainly change the direction of what we wanted to do. For me, I think actually having, I know it's easy to say, but I actually think the Championship is a great league in the sense that it is ultra competitive. It is really open, but it also is a great league to kind of reset. And I think Burnley have basically shown that this season, obviously with a good bit of investment. But what can happen if they went from one end of the spectrum with Sean Dyche to completely other end of the spectrum in terms of style of play with Vincent Kompany in the season. So I think that's a prime example, as you mentioned, Sam, of how it can change. And I think if we want to actually reset the culture and we want to go in a completely new direction and do that, the Championship probably would be the better league, because ultimately, although, as I mentioned in a previous video, that I think Gino this season has just been on promotion or bust. It doesn't matter how we get there. I think that mentality will continue in the Premier League, and ultimately he wants to stay in the Premier League, and he won't really care how we do it. And I think that's probably fair. I think in terms of what we've seen, I think the last season in the Premier League was a prime example of that for me. The way we really did just cut off Javi, bring back Kike in this kind of desperation phase, then bring in Nigel Pearson to do a firefighter job, and then even try and get that last bit out of the squad, which did deserve to go down with Graham Stack and Hayden Mullins. So I think what you've seen there and what we've seen over the few years is that Gino will do whatever it takes and he doesn't really care what people think about it. So if we actually want change, it probably will have to happen in the Championship. I don't know what you guys think of that, but Charlie, do you think it would really change if we, in the unexpected event that we do go up?
Firstly, great question, Sam. I think we'd be able to attract, and Ben Manga would be able to attract more high profile, better quality head coach and players, which could be an effective thing because, well, we haven't seen Ben Manga operate in the Premier League, but the quality and profile we could bring in would be higher. But I think if we're in the Premier League, you can scrap your one season plan because, like you mentioned about the stakes being so high and Gino doing everything to stay in. So I don't know if Ben Manga's as good as we're all hoping is. He could bring in the next Kike Sanchez-Flores Mark 1. Do you know what I mean? And bring in those Scotland players and keep us up for the next 5 years. But the pressure will be so high to stay in the league. There's no way Gino would give a manager guarantee one season, in my opinion.
I mean, that's a tough one, isn't it? I don't think you can never really turn down the financial boost the Premier League gives you. I don't think as these years go on, the further we get away from parachute money and the installments are smaller and so on, it becomes harder and harder. I think maybe there's an element of, if you had to see as a fan, what would we rather watch, a reset in the Premier League or a reset in the Championship? If both are successful, there's an element to you want to see a team kind of build and get that promotion season. It's the most enjoyable. It's probably, with a team like Watford, the most enjoyable sort of season you can have, really. So I do get the desire to have that. I think if you're asking anyone at the club, they'd say we'll take promotion. And, if it means a struggling year, but it gives you opportunity to, restructure some things off the field, spend a little bit more money in areas you wouldn't be able to normally, bring in some players and some longer contracts you feel that can help you if you do go down and go from there. And I'm sure they'd take that. But, it's a tough position to be in, and that's also something we have to consider too. And we're talking about the restructuring that's been going on. Most of the season, the off the field team haven't been working on the basis that we might be in the Championship or the Premier League next season, which isn't an easy thing. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, but I think you'd have to, if we got the opportunity to get promoted, we'd have to just embrace it and take it.
Sure thing. So, final point, and this is going to throw it back over to you, Jordan. So you've mentioned commitment to one season, but actually to rerun you through, I know we've gone for a little while. So, first point, delegation of authority, resetting the culture, deciding on an identity playing style, commitment to a one-season plan, and the fifth point is a redevelopment recruitment strategy. So, Jordan, the floor is yours.
Big job. It's very similar to what we talked about in terms of identifying the playing style. You have to commit to that. That's the first thing you got to be looking at. And then, there's got to be an assessment made. There's got to kind of be an autopsy of the current situation. What's going on? What players we have in the books? Who are our big assets? Who are we moving on? Who are we retaining? And that's the first thing you got to be looking at. And I think when it comes to recruitment, you have to also add to that the retention of players that we currently have. And you kind of look at some of the contracts we have currently, some of the players that have been extended. Someone like Christian Cavaselli still got another year or two in his contract, but not really someone you're looking at as a long-term option. There's been rumours of discussions to extend Tom Cleverley's contract. These are some things that if you're trying to rebuild and restructure your recruitment strategy, then slightly questionable decisions. So you have to kind of get on top of that, I think, and assess that first of all. And then you've also got to look at moving forward. What sort of players you're going to bring in? As I said, it ties into the style of play that you're going to be looking towards. Resale value. You have to have a mixture. We can't just go out and buy a bunch of younger players that are going to, grow and be potential for the future. You have to look at players that can help you now. You have more short-term options. You've got to be smart in the market, make some budget decisions, but you need some consistency in approach, and that comes from having that head coach philosophy, their identity and playing style all in place beforehand. If you're a recruitment team, you're sat in that room and you're trying to identify what you're doing for the next 4 windows. It's a nightmare if you're changing systems every couple months. It's impossible. It's an impossible job. You're reacting on the fly. You're seeing what's available, and you end up going towards those sorts of Mogi buyout deals. You're asking for intermediaries. No, oftentimes these situations, the clubs are reaching out to the agent saying, "Hey, we need this sort of player. Do you have anything for us?" And that's how they're doing their recruitment, which is not really sustainable for a team like us that are looking to achieve things, or hopefully looking to achieve things. So establishing that route. We know that Manga himself and Costa have certain avenues they like to look down. Portugal, Mexico, these are places that we've seen them operate before. So they have some tendencies they could perhaps work with, obviously different work permit situations, but potentially things they can go off. So, I mean, for me, it's just all about outlining what you're looking to achieve and being really clear with that to your team, making sure you have that communication and making sure you support the departments where necessary. We've really relied upon, since Gino's been here, since the Potters have been involved at Watford, we've really relied on the scouting network that's been talked about. And I think over time, clubs have caught up to that level and overtaken us. And I don't think it's the edge that it once was. And, I think we've seen the effects and the negative effects of trying to persist with that. And we've hit the mark in some places. I think South America, we've still been pretty strong on. But certainly domestically and even in Europe, we've often kind of come up a little bit short. So it's about establishing that route and finding that consistency throughout the whole model is the plan, or at least the hope for me.
Yeah, I think a couple of points, and Jordan mentioned it in terms of the mixture of profiles. I do think we should try and continue looking at the young talent from resale. I think that's one of the good things that Pozzos have brought, and I'm actually really excited to see how Helena Costa, what players she can bring in. I think it's evident we've seen with Ferreira and Henry Caruso. I don't want to talk about that too much. That just shows the lack of alignment, but 2 exciting players. And I think looking down the years, Richarlison, Luis Suarez, Purvis Estupiñán, João Pedro, even Ismail Akone, we're still getting those young quality players who we should be able to sell. I think one thing, and even when they first came in, we need those sort of players, but we also need the players who are going to come into the first team and make an instant impact. We saw that originally when we had Vidra, Alman Abdi, players like that. like you mentioned, Will Hughes, Chalobah, Delafeu, Roberto Pereira, different kind of scales, but they are the players. I think one of the things that Gino isn't great with is looking at his budget and allocating what he does with it. For example, I'm trying to think of one. The big one is Ismail Assar, but before him, Andre Gray, was he 18 million? Ismail Assar, 30 million. And even this season, when we're looking at our budget, we've spent 5 million on, what's his name?
And I mean, even if, and just to add to that, Okoye for 6 million.
Yeah, so I think that's an issue where we need to look at our budget and going, how are we going to spend? And I think we know how many outgoings go in. We need to be really shrewd in getting those players who are going to make an instant impact next season, come into the first team and make us try and hit our targets of top 6. So
one thing I'll say in regards to our recruitment strategy up until now, we touched on earlier how we started to stray away from having some sort of identity we were building towards. And I think as time's gone on and we've got into the Premier League, we had a few pieces we built around, we had some more successful players, but what clearly our structure or our plan lent towards was talent availability, both over fit. Team fit was secondary. If you had a player that was available you felt was undervalued, that you could get that value from, whether it's someone who, whether it's an Etienne Capoue, you're confident there's a good player in there, but has had his issues, playing for his team and so on. Or you maybe see a free agent like Sebastian Proudel or something like that. But when it comes to actually fitting the team, that was the head coach's problem. Get him in the team, make it work. Ismail Assar, this is a player we can get in, we're going to spend a lot of money on, but we think there's good resale value here. Let's get him in. We brought him in for a team that didn't, for multiple managers that didn't play with wingers. So, these are things you've got to look at. And, if you look at it purely from a business standpoint, you can maybe see Gino's rationale and thinking, you've got a resellable asset here, let's get him here, and then value's going to go up. But we all know the complexities of it doesn't work that well. So I think that's why we really have to look at how we can incorporate, there's nothing wrong with that inherently, but if you don't have an idea of how to kind of create an environment for them to succeed, then it's not going to be successful. So I think including team fit as a priority in recruitment has to be there. And sometimes that means you might pay market value. You might have to pay over a little bit. You can't necessarily take the gambles we've taken. And that's one more thing I'd say as well when it comes to recruitment strategy. Gino's not been averse to taking gambles. And for some reason, it seems that the gamble's always not having a left back or having one left back. But, if we can find a way to just to add balance, and I think that comes with having that recruitment strategy planned out and having the time to do so. If you're in the recruitment room, generally you're looking at that squad. In an ideal world, you have 2 players for every position at least, with similar levels of quality, or if not, other things that might bring them up, whether it be potential or experience, veterans or whatever. So if we can find something similar to that, or at least aspire to that, it makes it much easier for the guys in the recruitment room to sit there and actually come up with a plan and have these contingencies in mind when it comes to selling or signing players.
I just wanted to wrap up, Sam, with a poll that you put out actually, which was looking at the keep sell loan, which is which we've done on the channel before, and it always gets people talking about the players that they obviously look to keep, sell, or loan. It says it in the title. What were the results? I feel like I'm at uni, like kind of you just done your project, and then you come into me with your findings.
Yeah, so I put the poll out just ahead of the video to see the extent to which Watford fans are looking at a rebuild, and managed to get over 600 votes on each one, which was brilliant. So thank you everyone who voted. There's only, I'd say 12 plus 2 players that people want to keep for next season, 14 players. They are Craig Cathcart, people want his contract renewed. Hoot and Porteous, 99% of people out of 600 wanted him to stay. Sierralta, Jeremy Ngakia, Ferreira, Morris, Tom Deli Bashiru, Imran Louza, Yasser Asprilla, Ismail Kone, and Ken Sema are the ones that people want to stay. The other 2 that people are interested in keeping are João Pedro, although I think it will be very difficult to keep him if the right offer comes in. And the other one is people want to try and sign Hamza Chowdhury, which I think might be very difficult if we're not in the Premier League next season. So according to what the people want, we've only got 12 players next season with 0 goalkeepers there. So it's going to be, obviously it's not the fans controlling it, and there will be more players around, but if this is anything to go by, people want a big rebuild in the summer, and it's so important that we get that right.
I think it does.
Sorry, I was just going to, one thing I think that's really interesting, and I think one thing, main priority for us when it comes to recruitment needs to be a leader. Who is going to be our captain for the next 5 years? I love Tom Cleverley. We don't know how available he's going to be, but we need someone on that pitch. Who's the next Troy Deeney? And that is probably one of the hardest characteristics to recruit, someone who you think is going to be a leader. Is there someone in-house already that we think could do the job? But I think leadership on the pitch is something we've seriously lacked in. So in terms of recruitment, that would be one of my first things, thinking, is there anyone in the market who we can drop into this team who's shown really good leadership skills? Likely that they've got championship games under their belt, hopefully promotions, know how it's done. So that's something I just wanted to mention.
For sure. I think we've pretty much covered it all, unless there's anything I missed, guys. But I think the 5-point plan, to recap, starting from the top, delegation of authority, as mentioned by Charlie, myself resetting the culture, Jordan deciding on identity, playing style, commitment to a one-plan season with Sam, and then redeveloping the recruitment strategy, which we finished up with there. Jordan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, mate. Your insight, your expertise, the analysis of the current situation. What a man. Top stuff, mate. Thank you very much for coming on. Sam, Charlie, pleasure as always.
Thanks for having me.
Mate, what a man. Welcome back anytime. We can't let it be 2 years till you're back on again. It's got to be shorter than that.
2 years is a bit harsh.
Do you want to plug your podcast as well, Jordan?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. If you want to listen to the podcast, it's the Watford Buzz with Matt Messiano, myself, and Tom Bedell. We record every week, and just more of this conversation. And please come over and have a listen.
So thank you very much for watching. Let us know what you think in the comment section below. An absolute pleasure. Thanks again to Jordan, Sam, Charlie. It's been great. And make sure you do leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Check out Jordan's pod, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one. Up the Hornets.